Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I never thought my sister, my closest confidant, could betray me in the worst way imaginable. But when I found out she was sleeping with my husband and then tried to pin the blame on me, my entire world fell apart. The secrets I uncovered and the lies she spun were beyond anything I could have imagined, and the fallout changed my family forever. It started subtly, the kind of behavior you might not notice unless you were looking for it. Mark had always been attentive. He'd ask about my day, make time for dinner, and kiss me goodnight without fail. But lately, those gestures had become mechanical. His kisses were distracted, his questions were half-hearted, and his attention was often fixed on his phone. I tried to reason with myself. Mark was under a lot of pressure at work, juggling a major project that demanded long hours and late nights. I wanted to believe that's all it was, that the distance between us was temporary. But the little things kept piling up. He'd come home later and later, claiming meetings had run over or traffic was bad. He'd laugh nervously when I'd ask who he was texting and tuck his phone away before I could catch a glimpse. And then there were the looks he avoided. The way he'd shift uncomfortably when I tried to make eye contact during serious conversations. I felt like I was slowly being pushed into the background of his life, and I didn't know why. The tipping point came one quiet evening. Mark was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, I wasn't going to check it. I wasn't the kind of person to snoop. But then I saw the name on the notification. Emily. My sister. The message preview made my stomach twist. I can't stop thinking about last night. When can we talk? My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. The screen unlocked with a simple swipe, and before I could second-guess myself, I opened their conversation. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Flirtatious messages exchanged at all hours, plans to meet up in secret, and vivid descriptions of encounters that made me feel sick. My chest tightened, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I put the phone down and sat there, numb, until Mark came out of the bathroom. "Mark," I said, my voice shaky. "We need to talk." He stopped in his tracks, towel around his waist, a look of confusion flashing across his face. "What's wrong?" I held up his phone. "You tell me?" His expression shifted instantly, from confusion to panic. What are you doing with my phone?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my voice rising. "I saw the messages. From Emily." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, his face pale. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Don't lie to me," I yelled, the anger breaking through the numbness. "You've been sleeping with my sister, haven't you?" Mark tried to deny it, stumbling over his words, but the evidence was too damning. I pressed him until he finally broke down, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been going on for a few months." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was the man I'd built my life with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. And my sister, my closest confidant, the one person I believed would always have my back. "How could you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "How could you do this to me?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," Mark said, his eyes glistening with tears. It just happened. That's not an excuse." I shouted. "You betrayed me. Both of you." I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I grabbed my keys and left, driving aimlessly through the streets as tears streamed down my face. The betrayal was too much to process. I thought about all the times I confided in Emily about my worries, my frustrations, my hopes for the future. She'd listened, nodding sympathetically, while secretly stabbing me in the back. And Mark, the man I'd vowed to spend my life with, who promised to love and cherish me, had destroyed everything we'd built together. By the time I returned home, I still didn't have answers, only questions that swirled endlessly in my mind. Why had they done it? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the nightmare. The morning after Mark's confession, I woke up with a pounding headache and a hollow ache in my chest. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory of his words replayed in my mind like a broken record. By mid-morning, the numbness gave way to anger. The betrayal wasn't just Mark's. It was Emily's too. My sister, the person who'd been there for me through everything, had done the unthinkable. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling, and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her tone chipper. "Hey, what's up?" The sound of her voice sent a wave of fury through me. "How could you?" I spat, my voice shaking. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, gripping the phone tighter. You and Mark. He told me everything. Emily's voice shifted instantly, her tone defensive. Look, it's not what you think. Don't even try that. I cut her off. He admitted it. Months, Emily. Months of lying and sneaking around. How could you do this to me? She sighed, and when she spoke again, her words felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't my fault, she said. Mark told me you were distant, that you didn't care about him anymore. I only wanted to comfort him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're blaming me for this? You betrayed your own sister, and you're trying to make it my fault. I'm just saying you weren't exactly paying attention, she shot back, her voice cold. You've been so wrapped up in your own life, your job, your friends. You didn't even notice what was happening in your marriage. My blood boiled. Do you hear yourself right now? You're trying to justify sleeping with my husband by blaming me? I'm not justifying anything, she snapped. But maybe if you'd been there for him, he wouldn't have looked elsewhere. Her words left me speechless for a moment, the sheer audacity of her response knocking the wind out of me. When I finally found my voice, it was raw with emotion. You know what, Emily? I expected better from you. From Mark, too, but especially from you. You're my sister. You were supposed to have my back, not stab me in it. I'm not the only one at fault here, she said, refusing to back down. Mark made his choices, and so did you. I can't believe this, I said, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Emily sighed again, this time with exasperation. I'm sorry you found out this way. Okay? But what's done is done. Maybe it's time you take a look in the mirror and ask yourself why this happened. I ended the call without another word, my hand trembling as I set the phone down. My heart felt like it was going to explode from a mix of rage, sadness, and disbelief. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind replaying Emily's words over and over. I thought about all the times she'd come over for dinner, laughing with Mark like everything was normal. How she'd sat with me on the couch, listening to me talk about my frustrations with work and life, all while carrying on this affair. Her attempts to shift the blame only made the betrayal worse. I had expected guilt, maybe even remorse, but instead, she painted herself as the victim. That night, I confronted Mark again. Did you tell Emily I was distant? I asked, my voice trembling with both anger and hurt. He looked startled. What? No, well, I might have mentioned that we were having problems, but I never said it was your fault. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice rising. You fed her an excuse to justify what you both did. Do you know what she told me today? She said I pushed you away. Mark's face fell, and he looked down at the floor. I never wanted her to say that, he muttered. But you gave her the ammunition, I said. You both did. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling more isolated than ever. The two people I trusted most had betrayed me, and now they were trying to rewrite the narrative to make themselves feel better. Emily's words had cut deep, but I refused to let her gaslight me into thinking this was my fault. I knew better. This wasn't about me being distant or wrapped up in my own life. This was about two selfish people who had made terrible choices. As much as it hurt, I realized something important. I couldn't let their betrayal define me. I didn't have control over their actions, but I did have control over how I responded. And I wasn't about to let them win. When the truth about the affair came out, it didn't just shatter my marriage. It detonated my family. The fallout was immediate and devastating. I told my parents the same night I confronted Emily, hoping they'd help me make sense of it all. Instead, their reactions only deepened the chaos. My mom was stunned into silence at first. Then she started crying, her sobs growing louder with each passing moment. This can't be true, she kept repeating. Not Emily. Not my girls. My dad, on the other hand, didn't cry. His face hardened, his jaw tightening as I laid everything out. The texts, Mark's confession, Emily's audacity to blame me. When I finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without saying a word. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and broken relationships. Mom begged me to keep the affair quiet, her voice filled with desperation. People will talk, she said, wringing her hands. They'll judge our family. We need to handle this privately. Are you kidding me? I snapped. Emily slept with my husband, and you're worried about what the neighbors will think. It's not about the neighbors, she insisted. It's about protecting our family. If this gets out, it'll ruin everything. Emily already ruined everything, I said, my voice breaking. Dad, meanwhile, refused to even look at Emily. When she came over to talk to him, he shut the door in her face. You're no daughter of mine, he muttered under his breath when I asked him about it later. I'd always thought my family was strong enough to withstand anything. But this betrayal had revealed cracks I hadn't known existed, and it felt like those cracks were growing deeper with every passing day. Mark moved out a week after the confrontation. I didn't even have to ask him to leave. He packed his bags without a word and was gone before I got home from work. At first, I thought his absence would make things easier, but it only made the pain more acute. The house felt cavernous and empty without him, and everywhere I turned, there were reminders of the life we were supposed to share. The photo albums on the shelf, the anniversary gift he bought me just a few months earlier, the mug he always used for his morning coffee. They all mocked me with memories of what I'd lost. I tried boxing up his things, but every item I touched brought fresh waves of anger and sadness. By the end of the day, I was sitting on the floor in the middle of the living room, surrounded by his belongings and crying so hard I could barely breathe. As if dealing with Mark and my family wasn't enough, Emily decided to escalate things. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions, she began spinning her version of the story to anyone who would listen. According to Emily, I was the neglectful wife who had driven Mark into her arms. She painted herself as the hero of the story, the one who'd stepped in to comfort him when I couldn't be bothered. It's not like I planned for this to happen, she told one of our cousins at a family gathering. But honestly, it was inevitable. Their marriage was already falling apart. When I heard about her lies, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. It wasn't enough that she betrayed me. She was now rewriting the narrative to make herself look like the victim. I tried confronting her again, this time in front of our parents. "Stop lying," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You know exactly what you did." Emily didn't flinch. "I'm not lying," she said coolly. "Maybe if you'd been a better wife, none of this would have happened." The tension in the family reached a breaking point after that. My parents tried to mediate, but it was like trying to put out a wildfire with a garden hose. Mom clung to the hope that we could somehow repair the damage, while Dad grew more distant, retreating into silence whenever Emily's name came up. I felt completely isolated. Friends offered their support, but I could tell they didn't know what to say. Some of them even admitted they'd heard Emily's version of events, and while they didn't believe her, the fact that she was spreading lies was infuriating. By the end of the month, I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else to help me through this. I had to find my own way forward, even if it meant walking alone. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Emily's lies define my story. If she wanted a war, I was ready to fight back. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, I'd reached my limit. Emily's lies were spreading like wildfire, twisting the truth and turning me into the villain. I couldn't sit by and let her rewrite the narrative of my own life. The gathering was at my parents' house, a casual backyard barbecue that was supposed to be a chance for everyone to reconnect. I wasn't planning to go, but the thought of Emily spreading more lies behind my back pushed me to show up. When I arrived, I spotted her immediately. She was standing near the grill, laughing with one of our cousins as if nothing had happened. Seeing her so carefree, while I was barely holding myself together, ignited a fire in me. I waited until everyone had gathered around the table for dinner. My hands were shaking as I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to say something," I announced, my voice louder than I intended. The conversation around the table stopped, and all eyes turned to me. Emily raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Emily," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "Tell everyone the truth. Tell them how you betrayed me." The silence was deafening. Emily set down her drink and leaned back in her chair, her smirk infuriatingly calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coolly. "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "You slept with my husband. You lied to me, to all of us, and now you're trying to blame me for what you did." The tension in the room was palpable. My mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Dad's expression hardened, his gaze shifting between me and Emily. Emily tilted her head, her smirk widening. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done in my position," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "What does that even mean?" I demanded, my voice rising. "It means," she said, locking eyes with me, "that maybe if you'd been paying attention to your husband, none of this would have happened." Her words hung in the air like a bomb, and the room erupted into chaos. My mom started crying. My dad stood up, so abruptly his chair nearly toppled over, and my cousins whispered furiously to each other. "How dare you?" I shouted, stepping closer to her. "You don't get to sit there and act like this was my fault. You made a choice. You both did." Emily stood up, her smirk replaced by a steely glare. "And maybe you should take a look in the mirror, dear sister. Mark wouldn't have come to me if he felt like he had a wife who cared. The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. I looked around the table, hoping anyone, would speak up. But the shock was too great, and no one knew what to say. Finally, my dad broke the silence. "That's enough. Emily," he said, his voice cold. "You said more than enough." Emily crossed her arms, her defiance unshaken. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? Typical. Always taking her side, no matter what." "You were the bad guy," I shot back. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed this entire family. And if you think I'm going to let you twist the truth to make yourself look good, you're dead wrong." Emily laughed bitterly. "Go ahead, play the victim. That's all you've ever been good at." I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice cracking. "You've destroyed so much, and you don't even care." Emily rolled her eyes and grabbed her bag. "This conversation is over," she said, heading for the door. As she left, the room remained silent. I sat down, exhausted and overwhelmed. My mom reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away, too angry to accept her comfort. That night, I realized something important. Emily wasn't going to take responsibility for what she'd done. She'd twisted the truth so thoroughly in her mind that she genuinely believed she was the victim. If I wanted justice, if I wanted peace, I'd have to find it myself. After Emily's audacious performance at the family dinner, I knew I couldn't let her lies stand unchallenged. She had managed to twist the narrative, painting herself as the victim while making me look like the one at fault. It was infuriating, and I decided I wouldn't let her get away with it. Late one night, after another restless evening turning over her words in my mind, I started digging. I knew there had to be more to her story. Patterns, inconsistencies, something that would reveal the truth about who she really was. I started with her social media. Emily wasn't exactly subtle about her life. She loved posting selfies, cryptic quotes, and photos of her glamorous outings. As I scrolled through her old posts, a pattern began to emerge. There were flirty comments from men, posts that seemed designed to catch attention, and a few questionable photos with people she claimed were just friends. The real breakthroughs came when I started looking through old emails and messages. I found exchanges from years ago with an ex-boyfriend of hers, where she apologized for hooking up with his best friend. "I didn't mean to hurt you," one message read. "I just couldn't help how I felt." That phrase stuck with me. It was the same justification she'd used with me and Mark. The more I looked, the more it became clear that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. I even reached out to some of her old friends, people we both knew but hadn't stayed close with over the years. Most of them were hesitant to talk, but one in particular opened up after a few drinks during a long phone call. "Emily's always been complicated," she said carefully. "She likes attention, and sometimes she doesn't care where it comes from." When I pressed her for specifics, she admitted she'd heard rumors about Emily getting involved with a married co-worker at her last job. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, "but honestly, it wouldn't surprise me." Armed with this new information, I decided to share it with my parents. I thought if they saw the full picture, they'd finally understand the kind of person Emily had become. I printed out screenshots of messages, social media posts, and even included notes from my conversation with her former friend. When I presented everything to them, my dad's face turned red with anger. "This is what she's been doing all this time," he said, his voice tight. "Hurting people, lying, and making excuses for herself." Mom, however, was less convinced. She stared at the evidence, her brow furrowed, and then sighed deeply. "I don't know what you want us to do with this," she said. "I want you to hold her accountable," I said, my frustration boiling over. "You keep making excuses for her, but she's not the victim here. She's the one causing all the damage. She's been through a lot," Mom said softly. "You know how hard things were for her growing up. She's always been lost." Her response made me want to scream. "We all grew up in the same house, Mom," I said, my voice rising. "Don't act like she's the only one who had it hard. That doesn't give her a free pass to ruin other people's lives." Dad nodded in agreement. "She needs to hear this," he said firmly. "She needs to understand what she's done." But Mom shook her head. "And what good will that do?" she said. "She'll just get defensive like she always does. It won't change anything." "It's not about changing her," I said. "It's about standing up for the truth. She can't keep getting away with this." Despite my mom's reluctance, Dad agreed to confront Emily with the evidence. The next time we saw her, he didn't hold back. "You've been lying to everyone, Emily," he said, laying the papers in front of her. "It's time you own up to what you've done." Emily's reaction was predictably defensive. She glanced at the evidence, her expression unreadable, and then looked up at us with a cold smile. "So, you've been spying on me now?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "No," I said, stepping in. "I've been uncovering the truth. The truth you've been hiding behind your lies." She laughed bitterly. "You think this changes anything? People believe what they want to believe, and honestly, you're just making yourself look desperate." Her words stung, but I didn't back down. "This isn't about appearances," I said. "This is about accountability. You can lie to yourself all you want, but you're not fooling anyone anymore." As Emily stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a small flicker of relief. She wasn't ready to face the truth, but at least now, the lies were out in the open. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was reclaiming my voice. And I wasn't about to stop now. The knock at my door came late in the afternoon, just as I was finishing up cleaning the living room. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door and saw Emily standing there, a mix of shock and anger surged through me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. Emily tilted her head, her face wearing an exaggerated expression of innocence. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice soft and insincere. "I have nothing to say to you," I replied, gripping the door tighter. She sighed dramatically, crossing her arms. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. We're family. We can't keep avoiding each other forever." I laughed bitterly. "You're the one who destroyed this family, Emily. Don't act like we're just having a little spat that can be brushed under the rug." Her expression hardened, the faux sincerity melting away. "You're really going to stand there and act like you're innocent in all this? What is that supposed to mean?" I demanded, stepping out onto the porch. "You're not perfect either, you know," she said, her tone sharpening. "Maybe if you'd been a better wife, Mark wouldn't have looked elsewhere." Her words hit me like a slap, but they also ignited a fire within me. I clenched my fists, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Do you even hear yourself, Emily? You're blaming me for your decision to betray me. Do you have any idea how disgusting that is?" "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "Mark came to me because you weren't there for him. I didn't go looking for this. It just happened." "That excuse is getting old," I shot back. "You're not some innocent bystander who got caught up in a whirlwind. You made a choice. You both did." Emily shrugged, as if she couldn't care less about the damage she'd caused. "Believe what you want," she said, "but you can't erase the fact that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the perfect wife you think you were." That was the final straw. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You've already destroyed enough. Don't think you can waltz back into my life like nothing happened." Emily didn't move right away. She stood there, studying me with a cold, calculating expression. "You know," she said, her voice lowering, "I could have kept Mark if I wanted to. He only left because I told him to." Her words were meant to hurt, but they only strengthened my resolve. I stared at her, refusing to let her see how deeply she'd wounded me. "Congratulations, Emily," I said, my tone icy. "You've proved exactly what kind of person you are. Now leave before I call the cops." For a moment, it looked like she might argue, but then she huffed and turned on her heel, walking back to her car. "Good luck playing the victim, sis," she called over her shoulder. "Let me know how that works out for you." I slammed the door and leaned against it, shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline. The audacity of her visit left me reeling. She hadn't come to apologize or make amends. She'd come to twist the knife even further. That night, I sat on the couch, replaying the encounter in my mind. I couldn't understand how Emily could be so callous, so unapologetic about the pain she'd caused. But as I thought about her parting words, something clicked. She wanted me to feel powerless, to keep me questioning myself and doubting my worth. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Emily or Mark dictate the terms of my life anymore. If they wanted to play games, they could do it without me. It was time to set boundaries, protect myself, and focus on rebuilding the life they had tried to tear apart. Emily had underestimated me, and that was her biggest mistake. After Emily's audacious visit, I made a conscious decision to cut her out of my life. It wasn't easy. There were years of shared memories and a bond that, despite everything, still tugged at my heart. But the damage she'd caused was too great, and I knew that letting her stay in my life would only keep the wounds fresh. Therapy became my safe haven. I'd always thought of myself as someone who could handle anything on my own, but the betrayal had left me with scars that ran deeper than I could manage alone. My therapist helped me unpack the pain, the anger, and the lingering self-doubt that Emily's words had planted in my mind. One day, during a session, my therapist said something that stuck with me. What happened to you says everything about them, not you. You can choose to carry their actions or leave them behind. That sentence became my mantra. I leaned heavily on my friends during those months. They were my lifeline, offering me the support and validation I desperately needed. My closest friend, Rachel, became my unofficial therapist, always ready with a cup of coffee and a listening ear. You're stronger than this, she told me one evening as we sat in her kitchen. You've already been through the worst part. Now it's time to focus on yourself. She was right. Slowly but surely, I started putting the pieces of my life back together. I redecorated the house, turning it into a space that felt like mine rather than a reminder of what I'd lost. I threw myself into work, finding fulfillment in new challenges and opportunities. As for Mark, he didn't disappear as quietly as Emily did. A few weeks after he moved out, he started reaching out, first through texts and then with long, apologetic emails. I made a terrible mistake, one message read. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. Please give me a chance. I ignored the messages at first, but then he started showing up at the house unannounced. The first time, I opened the door, hoping to get it over with. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, his voice trembling. But I love you. I miss you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Hearing him say those words didn't bring the relief he probably hoped for. Instead, it made me feel cold. You can't make this right, Mark, I said. What you did can't be undone. I'm moving forward, and I suggest you do the same. He didn't give up easily, but eventually, he got the message. The final time he came by, I didn't answer the door. After a few minutes of knocking, he left a note. It was short, apologizing one last time and wishing me the best. I didn't keep it. Emily's absence was more complicated. She moved to another city not long after everything came to light, which made it easier to avoid her. But her presence lingered in our family like a shadow. My dad refused to speak her name. She made her choices, he said curtly when I brought her up once. She's not my concern anymore. Mom, on the other hand, was visibly torn. She still spoke to Emily occasionally, though their conversations were strained and infrequent. When I asked why she stayed in contact, she said, she's still my daughter, no matter what she's done. I can't just turn my back on her completely. But even Mom couldn't hide how much the situation weighed on her. Whenever Emily's name came up, her voice would falter, and I'd catch her glancing at Dad as if seeking his approval, or bracing for his disapproval. With both Emily and Mark out of the picture, life grew quieter. At first, the silence felt heavy, a constant reminder of the chaos that had uprooted my life. But over time, I came to appreciate it. The absence of their toxicity gave me space to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of the roles they had forced me into. I started going out more, saying yes to opportunities one would have hesitated about before. I joined a local hiking group, took a pottery class, and even started volunteering at an animal shelter. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for a marriage, not for family expectations, but for me, and it felt good. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of it. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to move forward. And I was determined to do just that. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest wounds, and as months turned into a year, I found myself slowly emerging from the darkness Emily and Mark had plunged me into. The pain didn't vanish entirely. It lingered in quiet moments, in old photos and fleeting thoughts, but it became less overwhelming, less all-consuming. I began to rediscover pieces of myself I'd forgotten during the chaos. I decorated the house in a way that felt entirely mine, filling it with colors and textures that brought me joy. My kitchen, once a reminder of shared meals and broken promises, became a sanctuary where I experimented with new recipes and hosted friends for cozy dinners. More than anything, I found joy in the little things: a sunny day spent gardening, the laughter of friends during a weekend hike, the satisfaction of finishing a good book. Those small moments, strung together, became the foundation of a new life, one I was building for myself. Then one quiet afternoon, a letter arrived. At first, I didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope, but as soon as I opened it, my breath caught. It was from Emily. Her words were careful, almost hesitant. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I can't keep pretending like it's not my fault. I hurt you in ways I can't even fully comprehend, and for that, I am deeply sorry. She went on to explain how she had been reflecting on her choices, how she'd come to realize the damage she'd caused not just to me, but to our entire family. I don't expect you to forgive me, she wrote, but I hope that one day we can find a way to rebuild what was lost. I read the letter twice, my emotions a tangled web of anger, sadness, and something else, something that felt like relief. For the first time, Emily was taking responsibility for her actions. But even with her apology in front of me, I wasn't ready to forgive her. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the effort. It was just that the wounds she'd left were still too raw. Trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt, especially when it's shattered by someone you thought would never hurt you. I tucked the letter into a drawer, deciding to deal with it later. For now, I wasn't ready to respond, and that was okay. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I owed her. It was something I had to find on my own terms, in my own time. That moment, though, marked a turning point. Emily's letter didn't erase the past, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: closure. Her acknowledgement of her mistakes, however late, was a step toward healing. Not for her, but for me. In the weeks that followed, I thought about the concept of forgiveness often. What did it mean to truly forgive someone? Did it mean letting them back into your life? Or was it simply about releasing the hold their actions had on you? I talked to my therapist about it, and she offered a perspective that resonated. Forgiveness doesn't have to mean reconciliation, she said. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. It's a gift you give yourself, not the other person. Those words stayed with me as I continued rebuilding my life. I didn't have to make a decision about Emily right away. For now, I could focus on finding peace within myself. One evening, as I sat in my newly redecorated living room with a cup of tea, I felt a quiet sense of contentment wash over me. The journey to get here had been painful, filled with moments of doubt and heartbreak, but it had also been transformative. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The betrayal that once defined me had become just one chapter in a much larger story. And for the first time, I felt ready to close that chapter and look forward to what came next. The realization came slowly, like the soft light of dawn creeping into a dark room. For so long, Emily and Mark's betrayal had consumed me, defining the way I saw myself and my future. But as time passed and the scars began to fade, I understood something fundamental. Their actions didn't define me. They were a part of my story, yes, but they didn't have to be the whole story. With that understanding came a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about what came next, not as a reaction to the pain they caused, but as a deliberate choice to create a life I could be proud of. One of those choices was deciding to open myself up to the possibility of love again. It wasn't an easy decision. The idea of trusting someone felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into the unknown. But I didn't want fear to control me. I started small, signing up for a dating app and cautiously chatting with people. At first, it was awkward. I found myself overanalyzing every conversation, second-guessing every compliment. But as I went on a few dates, I realized that not everyone was like Mark. Some people were genuine, kind, and as nervous about dating as I was. One evening, I met someone who surprised me, a man named Adam. We met for coffee at a cozy little shop, and from the moment we started talking, the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was thoughtful, with a quiet confidence that put me at ease. As we got to know each other, I was upfront about my past. I told Adam about the betrayal I'd endured and the walls I was still learning to lower. He listened without judgment, his steady gaze reassuring me that he wasn't scared off by my baggage. "I've been through some things too," he said, sharing his own stories of heartbreak and resilience. "I think it's those experiences that make us stronger, if we let them." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was talking to someone who truly understood me. But dating wasn't just about finding someone new. It was about learning to trust myself again. I paid attention to my instincts, setting boundaries when I needed to and walking away from anything that didn't feel right. The experience had left scars, but it had also made me more attuned to my own needs and worth. Outside of dating, I found strength in other areas of my life. I said yes to opportunities that once scared me, giving a presentation at work, joining a local art class, even going on a solo trip to the mountains. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost in the chaos of the past. With every new experience, I grew more confident in who I was and what I wanted. Emily's betrayal had taught me a painful but invaluable lesson. I couldn't control what others did, but I could control how I responded. That realization gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't known I was capable of. One evening, as I sat on the couch with Adam, laughing at a ridiculous comedy we'd found online, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not in a grand, sweeping way, but in the quiet, steady contentment of knowing I was building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. The journey to get here hadn't been easy, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, ready to face whatever came next. The betrayal had left its mark, but it hadn't broken me. It had shaped me, made me stronger, and given me a deeper understanding of who I was and what I deserved. This wasn't the ending I'd once imagined for myself, but it was a new beginning. And that was more than enough. Years have passed since the day my world crumbled, and now, looking back, it feels like a story from someone else's life. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, they were all consuming at the time, but they've since faded into something quieter. They've become lessons etched into my memory, reminders of my strength and resilience. Emily and I have little to no contact. Occasionally, I'll hear about her through family. Mom will mention a phone call or a holiday card. But we've never spoken directly. It's not that I haven't forgiven her. It's more that I've made peace with the fact that some relationships aren't meant to be repaired. Forgiveness, for me, wasn't about rekindling a bond. It was about letting go of the hold she had on my heart and mind. Mark, on the other hand, is nothing more than a distant memory. I haven't seen or heard from him in years, and I'm okay with that. He was a chapter in my life, one that ended painfully, but one that also led me to where I am today. The life I've built since then feels like a triumph. It's not perfect, whose life is, but it's mine, and it's full of things that make me happy. My home is a reflection of who I am now, a place filled with light, laughter, and memories I've created on my own terms. I've surrounded myself with people who genuinely care about me, friends who lift me up and remind me of my worth. My relationship with Adam has blossomed into something steady and kind, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. And most importantly, I've learned to trust myself again. The doubts and insecurities that once plagued me have been replaced by a quiet confidence. I know who I am, what I want, and what I deserve, and I no longer settle for less. Every now and then, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I think back to that time and feel a twinge of sadness for the person I was, the woman who trusted too easily, who gave too much of herself to people who didn't deserve it. But I also feel immense pride for the person I've become. The betrayal cut deep, leaving scars that I'll carry forever. But those scars don't define me. They're simply part of my story, reminders of what I've overcome. Healing was a long and difficult process, but it was also transformative. It taught me how to set boundaries, how to value myself, and how to move forward with grace and strength. If you told me back then that I'd one day look back on this time with gratitude, I wouldn't have believed you. But now, I can see how every hardship, every tear, and every moment of doubt led me to where I am today. I've learned that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning from it, growing through it, and finding joy on the other side. The betrayal that once felt like the end of my world turned out to be the beginning of a new one, a life richer and more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. Now, when I tell my story, it's not with bitterness or regret. It's with the clarity of someone who has walked through the fire and come out stronger. Betrayal cuts deep, but healing is possible. And for that, I'll always be grateful.